Hello and welcome to Fill in the Blanks, a podcast series by the International Organization for Migration and Climate Mobility Innovation Lab. I'm Sonali Manimaran, Climate Displacement Specialist at IOM. In this series, we'll be exploring what's driving climate mobility in Asia and the Pacific and how it's unfolding across the region. Through expert conversations, we're going to be talking about emerging solutions and initiatives and where action needs to go next. Today, I'm joined by Thannaletchimy Housset. She's an international consultant with IOM's Climate Mobility Innovation Lab for Asia and the Pacific, where she is involved in the development of the risk index for climate displacement. She brings over 13 years of experience in disaster displacement, socioeconomic policy, and data-driven analysis, and she was previously the research manager at the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center. Welcome, Thannaletchimy. So you've worked on disaster displacement with both IDMC and IOM, two organizations at the forefront of tracking and responding to displacement risks. What drew you to this field, and what keeps you motivated to work on these issues?
Thank you. I came into this field through a mix of curiosity and frustration. I was working on broader development and trade issues and kept seeing displacement come across, especially in places dealing with climate shocks. But it was always treated as a side effect. Now, I wanted to really understand this issue better. So here I am. What's kept me motivated and going is really the urgency and the humane nature of this work. Displacement isn't abstract. It affects lives, society, individual identities. And the fact that we still lack strong data and tools to anticipate it just makes it more pressing. This is truly what keeps me going.
So you've spent several years working with displacement data specifically. You've been tracking it, you've been analyzing it, visualizing it. From your perspective, what role does data really play in helping us understand and address climate displacement more effectively?
In my perspective, data plays two roles. First, it provides visibility. It identifies where displacement is happening, who's affected, and what's driving it. Second, it helps to shift the conversation. It moves the conversation from reaction to prevention. Without data, we're basically flying blind. But with the right data, we can plan better. We can focus on preventive measures like better land use and target adaptation measures. And these are measures that ultimately serve to supporting communities before the next crisis hits.
That's really powerful, not just reacting, but also proactively doing something about it. But displacement data is not always straightforward. Sometimes it's quite complex. So I have a two-part follow-up. What has been some challenges you faced in translating this data into something usable for decision makers? And what's been rewarding about it as well?
The hardest part is truly bridging the gap between technical complexity and practical use. You can have a beautifully calibrated model, but if it's not actionable, it won't be used. And what's been really rewarding in this exercise has been really co-designing tools with key local stakeholders and actually seeing how they adapt these tools to their own needs. When someone says this has helped us justify funding for disaster risk management, that's my win.
So climate displacement oftentimes is seen as something that's going to happen in the future. But I believe you worked with data that might be telling a different story. So what are some of the trends you're seeing now? And what do you think still gets misunderstood about climate displacement?
We are already seeing climate displacement in every part of this world. But one common misunderstanding is that people tend to confuse climate displacement with generally disaster displacement. Yes, climate change makes disaster more frequent, more severe, but not all disaster displacement is caused by climate change. And equally important, not all climate displacement happens suddenly. So it's not always through sudden onset events that people get displaced. Slow onset processes such as rising temperatures or sea level rise. These are processes that are quietly pushing people to move over time. These movements are actually much harder to track because they happen so gradually. And also these movements tend to be confused with with migration. So when they are understood as migration or voluntary, they're not showing up in any of the displacement data. So what this essentially means is that a lot of climate-related mobility is essentially invisible. both in the data and in the decisions that get made from that data. People may not be fleeing overnight, but they're still being displaced by unlivable conditions. And that's the major blind spot that we need to fix if we want to get ahead of risk.
Okay, Thannaletchimy, you've had experience specifically working in Asia and the Pacific. Can you tell us a little bit about the trends you've seen in climate displacement in this region specifically?
Yes, gladly. So what we have been recording for the last 10 years now in Asia Pacific is an increase in disaster displacements, primarily led by sudden onset. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, slow onset processes and displacements related to those are quite hard to track. But nevertheless, this region alone in the last 10 to 15 years has contributed up to 75% of total disaster displacements in the world. And that's quite significant. In light of climate projections, we estimate these figures to continue to rise. And as we get better with tracking slow onset processes, such as increasing temperatures or sea level rise, we believe that we will be able to capture more and more of this disaster displacement happening in the region itself.
It's quite a concerning trend, but all the more highlights why this work is all the more relevant. So in terms of the data that we can be collecting on climate displacement, what do you think are some indicators that are most critical in helping us understand this phenomenon?
Very good question. I think when it comes to data, you do have to have a mix of data types. One data type when it comes to talking about climate-related mobility is obviously the climate data. Hazard, exposure, vulnerability, all these aspects and components of risk is important. But displacement, like I said before, is about people. It's very human-centered. So having also data on that human aspect of it, such as vulnerabilities related to populations, poverty, access to basic services, land tenure, these are also aspects and indicators that are relevant when it comes to assessing risk. So for me, at the core of it all, it's about habitability. It's about whether a place still feels like home, whether people can safely live, work, access basic services, and connect with their communities. And the RICD, the Risk Index for Climate Displacement, is precisely trying to fill this gap. It is doing so by layering these dimensions, combining climate hazard data with household and community level indicators that speak to the notion of habitability. It may not be perfect yet, but it's definitely a step toward more granular and actionable foresight.
So let's say we are able to develop the perfect tool to be able to assess climate displacement. Mm-hmm. But even still, there's going to be a bit of a gap between the experts that are creating this and the ultimate end users, governments and communities, who might still find it a bit too complex to use. So in your experience, what really helps to make this data easier to understand and apply, but without losing any accuracy or nuance?
In my experience, there are two things that are crucial. First is visual storytelling. Using maps, snapshots, interactive dashboards, these actually help to bring data to life. People process visuals much faster and better than they do spreadsheets or reports. And the second element that would definitely help to make data more accessible is co-creation. How you get to that source of data is important. If you build a tool with the end user in mind, right from the start, then you're able to ask questions that are pertinent to drafting or creating this tool. Questions such as what decisions they would have to make that would be based on the data. And this would help you create something that is more intuitive and more relevant and hence more applicable. And this is precisely how we've approached RICD. It's not just about producing the data, but it's about making it usable without losing the nuance, accuracy that makes it meaningful.
So if you had the power and you could make one change in how governments or institutions use data to address climate displacement, what would you change?
I would tell them, go invest, just do it. But seriously, I would try to put across that displacement isn't just a humanitarian issue. It's about development. It's about climate risk. And if you don't invest in the data right now, you'll be spending more, far more, when you're reacting later. With the right data, you can prevent displacement, protect lives, and make much more targeted investments. It's not just about the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do, in my opinion.
Thank you so much, Letchimy. We heard a lot from you on how data helps us to not just react to climate displacement, but also to prepare for it, and how it's important to put people at the center of it. And not just that, but that we need to be co-creating these tools with the ultimate end users of it, such as governments, such as communities, and so on. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. And with that, we come to the end of our episode, and we hope to see you in the next one.